All right, so continuing on with classes in day 9, what we're going to be doing is converting a function that we made before into a class. And this class is going to be a little bit more dynamic because we're going to be able to add stuff to the names and amounts that are coming through. And they're also going to be just a little bit better than what we have here, just two lists that are actually kind of separated. They're not really in the same spot. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to define a class above all this stuff, and I'm going to call it class message users. And we're going to be using uppercase on M as well as U. And it's not going to inherit anything, so we can just leave it blank. And I'll say user details equals to an empty list. I'll say messages equals to an empty list. And then base message is going to be equal to this message. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy that and paste it right up here. And then we are going to define a method in here called define add user. And it's going to take in self, name, and message, or excuse me, self, name, and amount. And then we are going to create a dictionary from this called detail. I'm going to explain what all is going on here in just a moment. And then we'll say name as the key. And then it's going to be the past name or the name argument, and then amount as the another key, and again the past amount. And then what I want to do is get the date text. So the date text is going to be the same as this other one that we had here. I'm going to go ahead and copy that, paste that in here, and call this date text. And then I'm going to add to that detail with the date, and I'm going to set it equal to date text. And then finally, I'm going to do self.userDetails.append detail. Cool. Okay, so let's explain what's going on here. First of all, we defined our class, and then we have two empty lists here as attributes of this class, right? So when we have this empty list, I want to actually add users to the user detail. And that's what we do here. And the user detail is a list of dictionary items. So the dictionary item is going to end up having 3 different keys with 3 different values. First value is going to be the name, of course, then amount, and then finally the date. That is a much different approach than what we've seen here. I am going to update this later, but for now, that's what we're going to be doing. So this is giving us now creating this list for us. So as you might guess is we could say object equals to message user, parentheses, object.add user, and I could say Justin, and then 123.32. So that's that first item there. And then I can copy that, paste it below, and do the same thing with all of this other stuff. All right, so we could keep going down that list, and this is going to add that user for us. Right? So in here, before this detail is called, we can actually adjust some things. And I want to explain why I did it this way in just a second. But first of all, the name, we want to make sure the name is capitalized. So I'm going to just do what we did before, which was down here. We capitalized the name just this way. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and paste that in here to actually adjust the name that's being passed. So once John's being passed in there, it's going to actually capitalize and capitalize it, and then lowercase everything else. So if it was for some reason spelled like that, it would actually adjust it as a name normally is. Now, of course, I'm making a lot of assumptions here that names are spelled that way, but that's just what I'm doing just to show you the functionality here. So that's it for adding the user to this list. Once we have this, we can set another method called, I'm going to remove the spaces here, and I'm going to call it get details. And it's going to take in self, and it's just going to return self.user details. Right? So it's just going to return the list that's in here of user details. That's it. That's really straightforward, really simple. So as we have it right now, this is okay, but we actually want to create the messages just like what we did here. So now what we have to do is actually make a function called define make messages, and it's going to take in self. And we're going to say if the length of self.userDetails is greater than 0, then we want to go through that for loop. So for object or for detail in self.getDetails. We are going to loop through all those things. So of course the first thing is going to be name, and that's going to be name is equal to detail name. And then amount is equal to, we're going to do the string substitution for the amount. And I'll do %.2f%, and this is going to be, again, detail and amount. Let's get rid of that extra stuff. And then finally, date is equal to detail and date. And then the message is equal to self.baseMessage. And then finally, the new message is going to be equal to message.format. And just like what we did before, which I'll look at the function itself, we see this is the new message right here. So I can go ahead and just actually copy that completely. And then now I can append this to my message list. So self.messages.append new message, right? And then finally, after the for loop, so tabbing back one, we're going to return self.messages. Otherwise, we're going to return an empty list. So if this else clause is not executed, it's going to return an empty list. Okay, so let's go line by line to what's going on here. Now, in make messages, we're seeing if there's user details. So meaning if there's a list of items that actually exist. In this case, this is creating that list of items. And that list of items is a list of dictionaries, right? And we actually did some stuff to the dictionary down here, which I probably should do up here instead. So I'm going to come back down and say amount equals to basically this, just like that. So the dictionary amount is when we add the user, we are now doing all the changes we need, meaning we are changing it to uppercase, and we're also formatting the amount number as we should have it formatted once it comes down here. So then this, we can just use detail amount and detail date. So right here, what it's doing is it's going to loop through all of the items in get detail, and then it's going to assign those accordingly. And then we are going to update the message and append it, and that's going to be our class right there. So we can go through and add some users. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste some in here, and we are going to change this to being object. And then finally, we are going to do object.getDetails. So obj.getDetails, and we're going to take a look at that. Now what I'm going to do, I don't actually need this code below it, but I do want to actually run through this and see what's going on. And we're going to go again line by line exactly what's happening inside of this class. And I want to move any extra spaces that aren't necessary because of this copy and paste. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, open up Python 3, paste it in there, and then we're going to add our users and then finally get the details for those users. So this is that list that's actually coming through. So every time we add a new user, we are crafting that dictionary, and then we're adding that dictionary to the list, and this is that list that returns after we actually add all those users. Now if I keep adding users, then it's going to continue to update the get details, right? So that's going to be longer and longer, as we see right here. And you can definitely test this out on your own by just adding new details and just coming through here. Unfortunately, I keep on pressing the same one. And what we should see here is get details, and we now see more things coming through. Like John, as we see that it's actually updated correctly. We have a date in here. The amount is updated correctly, or it would be updated correctly if we entered it incorrectly. So this add user function or method is actually kind of important for actually using this class. And then once we do that, we can now then finally go in here and say obj.make messages, and with parentheses we will actually see all of the different messages. Oops, we have a name error in here, and that's related to this because we did a little copy and paste. So let's go ahead and change that. Come back in here, copy this class one more time, and then let's go ahead and update the object, and we are getting another error of text. So that should be in here, it should be the date. let's make sure that all of these things from copy and paste are in here. So name, amount, date. Okay, now everything looks good. Let's try that one more time and paste it in. And there we go. So we should have our messages coming through on each person. And as we see, we have a hi Justin, and then we have hi John, hi Sean, and so on, right? So it's going to go through each one of these that we actually passed, and it now has our list of messages. That's pretty cool. It is starting to work. Now, of course, if we actually had an email in here, let's actually add email equaling to none, right? So an email address for them. Then we're going to come in and underneath all this, we'll say if email is not none. Another way to say this is if email is not equal to none. We will then go to detail, email, and we're going to set it equal to email. And this is going to be important for us when we come down here. I'm going to say email equals to hello@teamcfe.com. And now what we'll see is one user will have email, the others will not. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and copy all this stuff again, paste it in, and we see that that first user has an email, an amount and date, and all the others do not. Now this is important because that user is the only one we can actually email. The other ones we can't. We have a message ready for them, but we can't actually email them, which is kind of important. So let's go back and go line by line to what's happening here and why we would use a class here instead of this function. Now, first of all, when we create the user details, like we want to have these user details somewhere. So what we can do is we can actually store them inside of this parameter that has a list. We can store them however we'd like. In this case, we stored them in a dictionary, so grabbing that particular user's information was a lot easier than just having two lists of stuff that is like somewhat related, or well, it's really hard to tell if it's actually related. Whereas once we put it into a dictionary, it's very easy to tell that it's actually related. And then what we can do after we have all that stuff added into that list for any individual user, we see that we can actually get those details using this method. Of course, we don't actually have to use the method. We could use just the parameter of dot user details. So instead of dot get details, we could do dot user details, and that would give us the same stuff. And then finally, after that, we have a method that makes the message for us. It basically takes the information from the user details, and it gets 3 keys here that we need, and it updates it for our message, right? Using that string substitution stuff that we talked about with the function. And then finally, after it makes each message for each user, right after it does that, it appends it to the messages like that we need to send, essentially. And then finally, after that, it's going to return those back. So this actually returns that list back to us of what those messages are. So that's it as far as updating this and changing it. Now, if all this stuff doesn't make sense, I want to make something very clear. Something about classes that you want to do is called getting and setting, right? So once you actually create a class, you'll have parameters and stuff like that, but then you're going to want to think of the class in terms of getting or setting. So either I'm going to get something or I'm going to set something. So in this case, I set something. In this case, I get something. In this case, I set something. And then later I could have something called get messages, and it would actually get all the messages that are available. So each one of those methods is about getting or setting. It doesn't always have to be that way, but that's essentially what I'm doing here. And that's important because when you want to use this, then you'll have the understanding, okay, add user is clearly something about user, versus if I said something like user detail, this doesn't tell me anything about this method. It's actually kind of confusing. Where add user or add user detail, if you called it that, that would actually tell us a lot about that particular method. Get details is also not that descriptive. In this case, it would probably be get user details. But again, it's about what makes the most sense for these getter or setter methods. And then finally, make messages does that. So The make messages is making sure that we also set user details prior to doing anything. Because if we didn't set any user details, make messages is just going to send us back an empty list. It's not going to send us back anything because we actually don't have anything to send back. Okay, so this is adjusting our for loop into a much better functionality. It's overall much better because, this original function, it's better than that because we can now actually set this data dynamically. And that's the main part, because right now as it stands, we would have to open up our Python file and actually change this data to actually work with this method. That doesn't do it for us. We actually want to do it in this way. So then all I have to do is import this class and be able to use it.